Welcome to the Weekly Dose Podcast, your one-stop shop for the weekly news in incretin mimetic therapies, with your host, ManOnMounjaro, Dave Knapp. Welcome to the Tuesday, October 1st edition of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, ManOnMounjaro. That's why I'm here. You are On the Pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Mounjaro, Zepbound, that pen. That's what we talk about here at On the Pen. And I can't believe it's October. I feel like every month just flies by a little bit quicker this year. It's good to have you all here. Thank you for joining on this special edition of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose. We don't typically do this podcast live, but we are today because there's just so much to talk about, and I wanted to hear from the community. So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, make sure you give the podcast a 5-star rating and review. But it's a whole lot of fun if you catch the live streams that we do over on YouTube. Do not hesitate to jump over to YouTube, hit subscribe. We are live every Thursday night with the show called On the Pen Live. This week's guest will be Dr. Daniel Rosen, renowned bariatric surgeon, board certified in obesity medicine, serves in New York City. He's just so well known and well loved within the bariatric and GLP-1 community for his compassionate care. And this will be his second appearance on the Pen. So we're excited to have him here. I do want to say hello to Sabrina, to Michael, to Jennifer, to Thelma, and to Gina, and to Max for joining us on the fly here for this episode. If you're new here, drop an N in the chat next to your name and let me know that you're new. We're going to talk about something that I think could be quite impactful given the current situation of the supply of Zepbound and Mounjaro. If you haven't heard about the strike that is going on the East Coast ports, this is something that you're going to want to be aware of. So basically, the strike is stretching from all the way up in New England, all the way down the eastern seaboard, all the way down to Texas and the Gulf. Half of the ports in this country are affected. That means many, many, many things that we rely on from overseas will be impacted depending on how long this strike lasts. And because there is a great deal of uncertainty, nobody knows exactly how long this strike will last. These ports are effectively shut down. And what we learned today from an article at CNBC is that essentially the journalists from CNBC did some investigating into the bills of lading. Now, if you're not familiar with shipping and freight and how all that works, a bill of lading is basically just a roster of what freight cargo is on board. And so basically in reviewing what comes in and out of specifically the ports at Norfolk, Virginia, essentially Wegovy, Ozempic, Mounjaro, Zepbound, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and injection pens are heavily imported using this Norfolk port, which is involved in this strike. And so essentially what you have is the possibility of the supply of all 4 of those medications being interrupted. Now, this has had a little time to materialize over the last 6 or 8 hours. That's why I wanted to see kind of what came about from this news. To put this into context, the greater context of what's going on is last week you had this letter come out through Reddit. This was communication from the FDA, never confirmed by the FDA, but also never denied by the FDA. Within this letter was essentially an acknowledgement that in October, tirzepatide would be removed from the master shortage list of the FDA. This would greatly impact 503A and 503B pharmacies' ability to mass produce compound versions of tirzepatide. Now, the crazy thing is that if Zepbound supply is interrupted because of these strikes, you may see that regardless of the FDA's intention or Eli Lilly's intention, the strike could, and I'm emphasizing the word could, make a difference in the supply of Zepbound. We'll have to see how this unfolds. Many people, as Lil Chi is saying in the chat here, many people are surmising that that's good news for compounds. I would say I don't know about that, because the compound medications are oftentimes coming from China and India, places overseas. Now, to kind of get back to the branded medication, because I don't know that we have a great deal of confidence that compounds wouldn't be impacted either, because as we mentioned, the API is coming from overseas in many cases. Now, with Novo Nordisk, they've already said that they're making adjustments to basically shift their cargo freight to airliners and have basically airplanes move the API across the world rather than these cargo ships. Novo Nordisk has pivoted, so potentially they'll be able to stay on top of that. Much of their API comes from their factories overseas. And of course, Eli Lilly relies on Corden Pharma, which is a Swiss manufacturer, to produce tirzepatide. And Eli Lilly has not commented, because basically Eli Lilly's stance is that they don't make any comments on their suppliers. So that is fascinating. So we heard from Novo Nordisk that Novo Nordisk plans to shift their shipping to air freight, and Eli Lilly is not commenting. And so it's hard to tell how much the impact will be. Of course, the longer it draws on, many people will be moving their cargo to air freight. So the availability of that will be very interesting to watch, but there could be impact here. And of course, we will be watching it very closely at OnThePen. And this timing is just so interesting, given that we could potentially, again, see the FDA move to remove tirzepatide from the shortage list. This strike could actually play an impact in whether or not that happens. So we will have to watch and see. Of course, the Weekly Dose podcast is sponsored by our friends at Ro. If you're not familiar with Ro, they're an amazing telemedicine company for which I am a community advisor and also a patient. You can visit ro.co/OTP to learn more about their Ro Body program. The Ro Body program is absolutely amazing. It's basically a program that gets you access to a doctor. You and your doctor sort of work through what your goals are health-wise. If appropriate, you will be enrolled in the Ro Body program, where patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year with the addition of lifestyle modifications, diet, and exercise. Of course, if you're going to start any new medication, it's extremely important that you be aware of the safety information, which is all available at ro.co/OTP. Within a couple clicks, you can find that safety information. But ro.co, the sponsor of OnThePen podcast, and we are so thankful to have them supporting the work that we do. Thank you to our good friends at Ro. Just such a great group over there. Of course, they have all sorts of other things beyond just GLP-1 medication. I'm trying to save my hairline, what's left of it, with some of their products there too. So super great stuff from Ro. Thank you for your sponsorship of the podcast. Moving on into a really interesting topic. The next thing I want to get into is basically Dave Ricks, fan of OTP, right? As I said in my TikTok video earlier, Dave Ricks, OTP bestie. But Dave Ricks was out there talking to the Financial Times this week. And it was about the future of Zepbound. And the interesting thing is that Eli Lilly is exploring the idea of doing some clinical trials for people with a BMI under 27. Now, this would specifically be looking at folks with a BMI of 25. The idea is that folks at a BMI of 25 are at greater risk of moving slowly into that BMI of 27. And the idea is that Zepbound, tirzepatide, potentially could be used to help them maintain their health without escalating their overweight into the obese category. And I think that this is a very interesting thing. Now, obviously, there was a day where tirzepatide was only available to type 2 diabetics. And it was very interesting how the community sort of took their corners. It seemed like many people thought these medications should only be reserved for diabetics. People who are overweight should not be taking them. And at the time, of course, being a type 2 diabetic and being somebody who opines on this topic, my stance at the time was it would be great if they could make enough medication for the market they're trying to serve before they add additional indications. They ultimately did add the indication of weight loss. We've struggled to maintain supply, but I think on balance, Eli Lilly has done a pretty good job of scaling their manufacturing out and trying to meet demand. But I get very frustrated when I see Eli Lilly launching in new markets when they can't completely serve the one that they're in. And so thankfully, this will be a couple years out because they would have to do some testing first. But I would hope that before they look at additional indications that they can serve the people that are on the medication. But I am all about anyone being able to get access to this medication who may benefit from it health-wise. And I think that's a very personal decision between doctors and patients. And I think the good thing is, if you've heard about this and maybe you haven't gotten the full context, I think it's really important to note that this would be way down the line. They would have to establish these clinical trials, recruit for these clinical trials, run the clinical trials, and then get an indication for it before this would be considered for the indication of basically a prophylaxis against development of clinical obesity. And so we'll have to see what comes up with that. I am a big proponent of anyone benefiting from these medications who can. I think that they probably, based upon what we've seen already, hold a whole host of marvelous health benefits outside of simply weight management. And many of you who follow OnThePen are already well aware of that. Drop it in the chat if you are well aware of that. The last thing that I wanted to get into, and again, I'm going to opine a little bit on this topic, is we saw this past week that the CEO of Weight Watchers was ousted as they've really shifted their strategy over the last year and a half, 2 years, of course, with the acquisition of Sequins. Now, the main doctor for Sequins was a man named Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, and Spencer Nadolsky was a guest on our OnThePen live show just a few short weeks ago. If you missed that, you don't have to miss out. You can definitely go back and catch the replay of that on demand at onthepen.tv. All 83 episodes of OnThePen Live are available at onthepen.tv. You can watch through all of them. It's basically just a link to the playlist here on YouTube. But go and check out the interview with Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, who I believe is starting his own practice, a brick and mortar somewhere. So very good news for Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, who is just a top-notch obesity medicine doctor, and not only a doctor, but an advocate, really, and somebody who really, truly understands what it's like for people who live with obesity. And so the interesting thing here is just the case study that Weight Watchers is in basically an American iconic brand crashing and burning. And so I don't want to give just my 10 cents on what I've seen from Weight Watchers. And I believe that this is going to be sort of a lightning rod of a take. Not everyone is going to agree with this take, but the way I see it is Weight Watchers decided, obviously, that they were going to shift away from the one thing I think that made Weight Watchers great. And honestly, it's one of the things that makes OnThePen great, and that's community. They had weekly meetings where people could go. They could sort of commiserate and live life together with people who had the same struggles. They could learn from each other, be encouraged by one another, struggle with one another. And they decided to close that part of it down and exchange it for, sort of a more app-based approach to that community. And I believe that a lot of people got turned off by that. At the same time, you saw them embrace GLP-1s, which I think was a natural progression for just about any company that is in the business of offering weight management products. I think that the problem with the way that Weight Watchers approach this is they did it apologetically. They said, we're sorry. We're part of the problem. We are going to offer medicine now. Now, the interesting thing is the things for which Weight Watchers apologized for, which in my estimation were contributing to toxic diet culture, I'm not sure that they were driving that, though. I think it was symptomatic of the times that we were living in and the lack of understanding about what obesity was. It wasn't ever just about willpower. It was also about biology. It was a combination, right, of lifestyle choices for some people, of broken biology for some people. It's just very nuanced, and it's never been treated as such. It's only been treated as a personality deficit or a moral failing. But I don't think that was unique to Weight Watchers. I think Weight Watchers was just existing within the environment that it was in, a culture that looked at obesity, and to some extent still does today, though we're making headway, as a moral failing. Now, my problem with Weight Watchers as a brand, strictly from a marketing perspective, coming out and basically apologizing the way that they did, was that they were apologizing to a subset of the obese population that they were never going to get back. Again, this is strictly from a business standpoint. They were never going to win back the people who felt like they had been victimized by Weight Watchers' approach or harmed in some way by Weight Watchers' approach. So they came out and they apologized to a group of people that they were never, ever, ever, ever going to get back as customers. And with the proliferation of GLP-1 medications came a golden opportunity for Weight Watchers to reinvent itself, yes, but also go after a segment of the market that they'd never touched before. Instead, they tried to reach back to people that they were never, ever, ever going to get back as customers. When the pool of people who could benefit from GLP-1s plus some sort of lifestyle modification intervention are in the hundreds of millions just in the United States alone. So there was a lot of room to grow. Instead, I believe what Weight Watchers did was really just tear down their own brand, and they're left kind of with the crumbling pieces of what once was, for better or for worse, an iconic brand in the United States. So I realize that there's a lot of opinions about Weight Watchers. I would love to hear your experience in the comments of this video. Of course, if you're listening on the podcast and would like to opine, there's ways to send emails and text messages. Those are going to be linked in the show notes. But you can also come over to the video on YouTube and drop your comments there. Just a little bit of my own personal take as I've watched this sort of unfold. You can kind of see the writing on the wall. Hello, Laura. How are you tonight? You can see the writing on the wall with the departure of many of their top people, including Dr. Spencer Nadolsky being the latest to leave right before Seema Sistani, the CEO of Weight Watchers, was sort of ousted out of her position there at Weight Watchers. So that's my take on it. I wonder what yours is, because I know there's a lot of opinions about that, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Drop them in the comments of this video. Thank you for being here with us on a rare live edition of On the Pen Live, On the Pen, the weekly dose podcast. In fact, please make sure before you leave, you hit that like, hit that bell, hit that subscribe button. Also, if you are on the podcast, a reminder to give a 5-star rating and review to the podcast. It really helps it out. Helps other people to get the message from On the Pen, get the weekly news, and hopefully get a little bit more community. If you're interested, you can get more community at our Discord. The link will be in the description. If the link is not working, you can always just go to Discord and type in On the Pen. You'll get right there. We've got a great Discord. A lot of times we go chit chat after a live stream, after an On the Pen live, and the conversation just keeps going over there. We would love to have you over there. But thank you for being with us tonight. Until next week, I hope you have a great week. This was an excellent one to talk about tonight. Lots of interesting stuff to get into, and stuff we will certainly be following in the days and weeks to come. You got to stay tuned to On the Pen to make sure you're on top of all the latest and greatest news. Until next week, we'll see you.
Welcome to the Weekly Dose Podcast, your one-stop shop for the weekly news in incretin mimetic therapies, with your host, ManOnMounjaro, Dave Knapp.